The morning breeze timidly entered through the semi-open window of the house, bringing with it the freshness of a new day and the promise that, even amid adversity, there would always be a reason to rise again. In that simple, yet welcoming home, lived James, a dedicated private nurse whose routine was to care for others with affection and professionalism. James had stood out in his profession not only for his technical knowledge, but for his ability to convey trust and comfort to those in need. And on that day, he was attending to a situation that required his attention and sensitivity in a different way. His longtime friend Chris had suffered an accident a few days ago. The physical pain was visible, but there was also an emotional fragility that required special care. Upon arriving at Chris's house, James felt a mix of anxiety and responsibility. He had always been the present friend, the one who, even amid his own concerns, gave himself body and soul to help. At that moment, however, something inside him was also stirring. Seeing Chris lying down, his face contorted between pain and anguish, James realized that there was more than just a professional relationship. There was a connection that went beyond the care protocols. Chris was lying on the couch in the living room, covered with a light blue sheet, his gaze lost in thoughts. His eyes, usually vibrant, now seemed cloudy, and the rigidity of his gestures betrayed the pain he was enduring. James approached slowly, as if he wanted to respect his friend's space, and sat next to him. "Hello, Chris. How are you feeling today?" James asked, his voice gentle, trying to convey the warmth of his presence. Chris slowly opened his eyes, surprised to see his friend there, so close. There was something different in James's gaze, an intensity he hadn't noticed before. "Better, I think. The pain is still there, but it's not as unbearable as yesterday," Chris replied, his voice trembling but sincere. James nodded, gently running his hand over Chris's arm, a gesture that mixed professionalism with affection. He settled in beside him, offering not only medical care but also a silent and comforting company. As the days passed, James's visits to Chris's house became part of the routine. Each appointment, each conversation, was a step toward a deeper bond. Chris, who had previously been withdrawn and insecure, began to open up, revealing dreams and fears he never thought he would share. And James, always attentive, listened with an open heart, without judgment, just with the genuine desire to understand what was going on inside his friend. On a quiet afternoon, as the sun slowly set on the horizon, casting warm colors across the room, James was adjusting Chris's medication when he noticed a different look. The atmosphere was silent except for the soft sound of the TV in the background and the distant hum of music. Chris, propped up on the pillows, was looking at James with a gaze that blended gratitude, admiration, and something else, something that James felt vibrating inside him. "You make everything seem less heavy, you know," Chris murmured, his voice low, almost a whisper. James smiled, not daring to interrupt, absorbing every word as if each syllable carried special meaning. "It's the least I can do, Chris. You've always been my friend, and seeing you go through this makes me want to be by your side always," James replied sincerely. Time began to build between them, a camaraderie that went beyond the clinical setting. The conversation stretched for hours, while the world outside seemed to fade into silence. James, with his attentive gaze and measured words, began to realize that his closeness with Chris was awakening feelings long dormant. Gradually, what had initially been a professional care relationship transformed into something more. It wasn't overwhelming love, but a silent connection, built in moments of vulnerability, shared laughter, and gestures of tenderness. James found himself enchanted by the way Chris, even weakened by the accident, showed inner strength and sensitivity that touched him deeply. On a Monday morning, as the sky shed its clouds and the fresh air promised a new beginning, Chris asked to speak alone. James, who was preparing the medication, answered the call without hesitation, knowing those words came from the heart. "James, I've been thinking a lot about all this, about how you're always here, making me feel like I'm not alone." Chris's voice trembled, but there was clarity in his expression. James approached and sat beside him on the couch. The silence that followed was comfortable, filled with meaning that words couldn't express. "You know, sometimes I think your care for me goes beyond the role of nurse," Chris continued, his eyes searching James's for confirmation, a sign that he wasn't exaggerating. James took Chris's hand, and in that simple gesture, a spark ignited between them. "I feel something strong when I'm with you, Chris. I don't know if it's just the feeling of friendship, but there's something more, something that makes me want to always be close, to take care of you." To see you smile, James said, with a sincerity that made the atmosphere feel even more intimate. Chris's gaze softened, and a shy smile lit up his face as if that moment was a revelation. I feel that too, James. Even in the midst of pain and recovery, it's you who gives me the strength to keep going. As the day turned into night, the conversation continued, and the tension between them, once restrained, began to manifest in small gestures. A prolonged touch, a look that lingered, the physical closeness becoming more natural. The days passed, and with them, moments of intimacy gradually and delicately formed. On one of those afternoons, after a physiotherapy session that had left Chris exhausted, the two of them met in the living room. The rain was beginning to fall softly outside, creating a cozy and intimate atmosphere. James, observing his friend's fatigue, prepared a cup of tea and sat beside him. While they talked about trivial things, there was a latent energy in the air, a contained desire that both recognized, but preferred to let it reveal itself slowly. At one point, Chris let out a sigh, and James noticed how his gesture seemed charged with something unsaid. You know, James, I never imagined I could feel so much even when everything seems to crumble, Chris said, his voice choked with emotion. James approached slowly, as if fearing to break the delicate barrier between them. Their eyes met, and at that moment, everything seemed suspended as if time stopped to allow the connection to deepen. It was in that moment of camaraderie that they let themselves be carried away by a moment of pure surrender. There were no long words or exaggerated promises, just the silent certainty that, here, in this shared space, they had found something real. I confess that I was speechless. I had really judged him by his appearance. But as I cared for him, I began to realize that this man was much more than I had imagined. We walked through the house, talking about trivial things, until the afternoon gave way to night. I stayed silent, watching as he settled with a look that now seemed to carry much more intention. Let's go, I've missed you, he said, his voice low but full of feeling. I returned the smile, feeling sincerity in every word he said. Let's go, I missed you too. This moment had a natural camaraderie. Now, it wasn't just professional care, it was pure pleasure, without haste, no commitment, just mutual desire. We spent hours together talking, laughing, and surrendering to the moment as if time didn't exist. When we knew that rest was calling us, he understood without needing words. Later, as we said goodbye, our looks said everything. A soft smile, and the silent promise that this was just the beginning. That scene, though brief, remained engraved in both of our memories. There was no need to make explicit what had happened. The feeling, the shared energy, was enough, the certainty that something new had begun. Each touch, each gesture, strengthened the bond that was forming, making the relationship more intense and delicate. As the days went by, the routine of care blended with moments of intimacy that the two of them savored without haste. James continued to meet Chris's needs, but now there was also an exchange of looks, a subtle touch of hands that spoke louder than words. Each visit was an opportunity to rediscover affection, to build a story where care transformed into love. On an autumn afternoon, as the golden leaves danced in the wind outside, Chris was resting after a session of exercises. James approached with the naturalness of someone who had become part of that environment. He sat beside his friend, and for a few moments, the silence between them was filled only by the soft sound of the rain. You know, sometimes I think the hardest things are also the most beautiful, James asked, his voice calm and introspective. Chris looked at him, with a mix of gratitude and tenderness. I think so. And what I feel now is so unexpected but so true. James nodded, feeling his heart race. I never imagined that caring for someone could transform me in so many ways. You've made me realize that even in the most challenging situations, there's room for love. The words hung in the air, and both of them knew that this conversation was just the surface of something deeper. It wasn't just about the accident, the recovery, or the daily care. It was about discovering a feeling that grew with every exchanged look, every gesture of tenderness. Nights followed, and with them, encounters that went beyond the professional. On one of these encounters, when the house was immersed in soft light and silence invited intimacy, they met in the kitchen. James was preparing dinner while Chris watched, and there was a lightness in the air, a subtle invitation for the barriers to fall. You know, I've always admired your ability to turn routine into something special, Chris said, with a shy smile. James stopped for a moment looking at him. And I admire your strength, Chris. Even when everything seems to crumble, you find reasons to keep going. The atmosphere intensified without the need for more words. In a natural gesture, James approached and gently touched Chris's face. The touch was light, almost imperceptible, but filled with a meaning that only they understood. The moment lingered, and the intimacy that bound them gained new shades. There was no rush, only the certainty that love was growing naturally, like a flower opening to the sun, without forcing its petals. Every shared moment was a silent promise that this feeling, though unexpected, was real and transformative. The days turned into weeks, and the relationship between James and Chris solidified. They knew each other completely, from the most subtle gestures to the deepest words. The house, which had initially been a place of pain and recovery, became a refuge where love blossomed amid care and camaraderie. On a cold winter night, when the city rested under a blanket of tranquility, they found new meaning in their closeness. After a long day of care and conversations, Chris, now more confident, lay in the living room and James stayed by his side, holding his hand with the tenderness of someone who didn't want to let him go. "You're the reason I can smile even on the hardest days," Chris whispered, his eyes brimming with emotion. James replied with a look that said more than any words. There, in that moment, the distance between the professional and the personal disappeared. They surrendered to the feeling, letting silence and physical closeness speak for themselves. The atmosphere was charged with a subtle and intense energy, as if every beat of their hearts was a silent declaration of love. The story of James and Chris didn't have a defined ending, but it revealed itself with each new day, with every new gesture of care and affection. Fate, uncertain and unpredictable, had brought them together in an unexpected way, and now, amid adversity, they had discovered that love could bloom in the most unlikely places. As the seasons changed, the house where everything had happened became a sanctuary of memories and promises. The scars of the past, both physical and emotional, were treated with the tenderness of those who knew that every mark tells a story of overcoming. And in this environment of healing, the feelings between James and Chris grew, without rush, respecting every stage of the process. The future was a mystery, but what was certain was the knowledge that together they would find strength to face any storm. The bond between them, built with patience and delicacy, was a reminder that love, when real, transcends the barriers of time and circumstance. At the end of another day, when night fell and silence welcomed dreams, James bid farewell to Chris with a tight embrace and a look that promised return. Every farewell was also a reunion, for they knew that the bond that united them was greater than the distance, greater than the pain. And so, between care and desire, between tears and smiles, the story of James and Chris continued, open and full of possibilities, like a book that still had many pages to be written, page by page, with the certainty that true love is, above all, a journey of mutual discovery and silent surrender.
Comment below what you would do in their place. Would you fight, hide your desires, or give in completely? If you liked it, like and share when no one's watching. And don't forget, betrayal is not subscribing to the channel.